How's everyone? Welcome back to another episode of In the Untamed Workshop here. Previous episode we were looking at this. This is a low layer twist Damascus fish eagle liner lock folding knife blade. If you haven't checked it out, please go check out that episode where we shape and machine and heat treat this blade. So in this episode we're going to be moving on to doing the handle now, getting the internal mechanism of the folding knife all worked out and fit up and working as it should. So, hope you enjoy this episode. Let's get to work. Alright, so here's our blade, basically all ready to go, fitted to the knife. So for the moment, we don't need this. We're going to be working on the handles. So I use grade 5 titanium. And I have these laser cut. In the past, I would do this by hand. I can still do it by hand, but cutting this slot for the lock bar is a pain in the backside. And if you can avoid doing it, then by all means, avoid doing it. And a laser cutter is just so much more efficient, and it allows us to get some of the detail work put in as well, with minimal effort. The other thing it allows us to do is make sure that these are perfectly matched, our holes line up and everything. And then the other thing I like to do is, if you put the two together, you can see I've got these teeth on the lock bar that stick out past the other liner. This is so that when the knife is put together, you always have easy access to that lock bar. So the first thing what we're going to do is we're going to actually plan out what we are doing. So here's our liners, grade 5 titanium, and then for the body of this knife we're going to use some blackwood. This is African blackwood. Latin name is Dalbergia melanoxylon. I love this stuff. It's still probably one of my favorite woods. Then I'm trying something different. This is corian. It's a synthetic rock basically. And what we're actually going to do is, so if this is our knife, if that's the handle of our knife, we're going to make a accent spacer in the middle. So right in the middle of the knife here, this will be the white of the corian, and then everything on the left and right will be our blackwood. And then at the same time, we're going to put some G10, white and black G10 spacers to just kind of make it all pop a little bit nicer. And then for the back spacer, we're going to be using this. This is synthetic ivory. So it's, again, plastic synthetic material. It's got a nice grain to it. It polishes very nicely. It's really nice material. So that's going to be our back spacer, our accent spacer, the body of our handle, and then those are going to, the G10 will be our accents, and at the same time we'll also provide the base for our handle as well. So first thing to do is we are going to clean these up, because one thing is the laser cutting does leave quite a nasty burr and some dross that we have to just clean off of these liners. So we're going to clean these up on the belt sander. Then I'm going to lay out where I want all of our holes, our screw holes for holding the handle together, and the back spacer as well. Then we'll drill and tap those. Those are going to be a 1.6 millimeter little screw. So that is a screw that big. Hope you can see that. And then from there we'll start putting the handle together. Alright, so we've got our holes drilled to 1.45, and now we're going to tap them with a 1.6. Now the way I do this is freehand with a hand drill, but I have it set to screw mode and I have the torque down to 1. So in theory, if this bit binds up, then it will stop before it snaps, in theory. So the tap we're using is a 1.6 millimeter thread forming tap. It's not a thread cutting tap, it's a thread forming tap. That's why we drill to 1.45. So first thing we do is we need some cutting spray, and then I just hold it nice and gently, let the bit do the work. As soon as I feel it start to bind, hit reverse, and that's it. 1. Bind, reverse, and 3. That's it. It's as simple as that. Now we're just going to tap them all. You'll see also, because I'm holding it in my hand, if I feel it start to bind, I let it go. I don't hold it too tight so that it snaps the bit. I make sure that I am going as easy as possible on the tap. And by holding in my hand, I can feel when it wants to bind up. A lot of people will say, but you need a square jig and everything. But guys, it's only, I'm only using titanium that's 1.2 millimeters thick, and the hole is only 1.45. This bit will find center. That's the whole point of a thread forming tap. It's going to find center. It's going to run perpendicular to the face. So we don't have to worry about it going off skew. And even if it does, it can only go off by 1 degree, maybe 2, which is not going to affect the performance of the thread holding or the screw. So don't overthink it. Here we go. And sometimes they go straight through like that one, nice and easy. This one here. Oh. No, okay. This one's a bit tighter, sometimes they are. Put a bit more cutting fluid. Don't force it, just work it backwards, forwards, and there we're through. The worst thing you can do is force it or go full send. That is the worst thing you can do when cutting tiny little threads like this. There we are, done. What was that? That was 1, 2, 3 on this side and 5 on that side. That's 8 1.6 mil threads cut in what? 2 minutes? And I spent most of my time talking to the camera. Obviously, on this side, we don't tap these 2 holes here. In fact, these are drilled for 1.6. That is to allow our screws to pass through. And then they'll screw into the other side. So, now what we're going to do, let's just clean this up a little bit, clean off all the cutting fluid. Okay, so now that all of our holes are tapped, the next thing to do on this liner is we want to thin out the lock bar. Right at the top here, we don't need it as thick as it is. We can nominally take, it's 1.2 mils thick right now. We can take it down to 0.6 and it will be more than adequate for the job we need it to do. So this is just a little jig that I've set up to hold the liner nice and square to the face of the grinder. And there's a little piece of 0.6 millimeter G10 stuck behind the face of the lock bar just to get it to protrude 0.6 of a mil out past the rest of the liner, so I can grind until it's flush, and then I'll know that I've thinned the face of the lock bar by by 0.6 millimeters. Alright, so the liners themselves are now pretty much prepared for the handle. I've also cut a recess here into the back of the lock bar. That's just to make it a little bit easier on the thumb so it's not so stiff when the knife is constructed. We can tune that a little bit more. I normally take it to about half the thickness of the liner, but we can tune that if we need to when it comes time to bend the lock bar. We're not going to bend the lock bar yet. I leave that for a little bit later. For now, it's time to actually start on our handles. So first thing we're going to do is remember the plan. So we want that there, and that about there. So our space is going to go something like that. It's not a piece of wood. Where the grain is there, so we want that grain. So that is going to take up that back half of the knife there. So there to there. Okay, so we'll make that cut first, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so there's our blackwood cut, and I trued up the edges as well so they're nice and square and straight. Time for the corian. So if we want our knife to be like that, we want our corian to be we'll start it there, and that gives us room to trim it down. Here's my square. Where did I put my square? Please hold for connection.
A few moments later.
Got my square. There. Okay, now to cut and square the ends on this stuff. Alright, so now we have our corian. It goes in there like that. Down a little bit. Something like that. Okay. Corian is a little bit wide, so we'll trim that down because the next thing we need to do is our black and white G10 spaces. So it's going to go blackwood, white G10, black G10, white corian, black G10, white G10, blackwood. That should make it pop nicely for us. So I just need to go and cut some strips of this, just like that. Right, so there we have our 2 black, 2 white. So it's all into order here. Blackwood, white spacer, black spacer, corian, black spacer, white spacer, white spacer, blackwood. Okay, and then we just need to make sure that we're giving ourselves enough room. We need to thin out the corian, so let me just go and do that very quickly.
A few moments later.
Spaces back in position. There, there. Okay, make sure that we have enough room for our knife. Something like that. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue these all down on a flat surface so that it's all stuck together one block, and then you'll see my plan from there. Here, I've got my granite slab here, nicely cleaned off, and I've got my painter's tape. Take a piece like this. First thing I'm going to put down is the first section of our blackwood. Nice and tight. And let's just double check. We've got enough room for our knife. Yep, we do. Okay. Now it's very simple. Now I take my glue, and all I do is I just lift a little bit, and I can get the glue in between each layer here, like so, in between there, in between there, and finally in between there. Now I just have to make sure that this finger's stuck. White space is down like so. Down, down, down. Right. Now we push it nice and flat into the granite, and then we're going to spray it. Of course, I've got super glue all over my fingertips, but that's par for the course here. Right. Then we can take this, peel it off the back like so. Alright, now what we're going to do is we're going to take this over to the belt sander, and we're going to flatten this side and then this side, so that we're going to end up with one flat piece.
One eternity later.
Alright, so there are our scales, all thinned out and smoothed over. Now, these ended up a little bit thinner than I was hoping for, so because of that we're going to be upgrading our backing liner to a 1.6mm thick G10. This will just give us a little bit of width we need, a little bit of thickness, and everything will be alright in the end. So, now it's time to glue these onto the liners. So these scales are now hook matched. You can see everything still lines up nicely, so that's fine. So this means that when we drill the holes for the liners, when we drill the holes from the liners through this, these will line up. So that's exactly what we're going to do now. There is our scale. Get everything in position where we want it, which is about there. There we go. Now we're going to go and drill those 3 holes. Being careful to use a drill bit smaller than the drill bit that we used to tap, if that makes any sense. Reason being, we don't want to damage the threads of those taps. Alright, our next step is to counterbore the screw holes for the heads of the screws. The size that we're going to need is a 3mm. Now I don't actually have a 1.6 to 3mm counterbore, and I haven't been able to find one. So here's how I do this. We take a normal 3mm drill bit. And all we're going to do is go down just deep enough to create a 3mm shoulder. So if we have a look, all I've done is just drill down just enough that we've got the full width of 3mm. Now the reason for that is because the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to load up a 3mm end mill. And this is going to give us our nice sharp counterbore shoulders. We're also going to set the table like a stop. So the way I do this, take the table, push this all the way down as far as it will go. Then pick the table up. We want our counterbore to be about there. Tighten the table off. And now we're good to go. And that is how I get a 3mm counterbore on a 1.6mm hole. Okay, and now all we need to do is to shape these handles to their individual liners. So this will involve putting the screws through and then trimming the screws so that they flush through to the other side, and then we can go ahead and grind the liners flush all the way around. And then one other thing we need to do is on the lock side of the liners, we're going to mill 2 pockets for the heads of the screw that hold the knife together through the backspacer. This will become a little bit more clear later when we see how we construct the knife. Here are those counterbores going into the back side of the liner to make room for the screw heads for the backspacer. Okay, so that's our liners. Basically at this point done until final shaping. And to do final shaping, we now need the backspacer. So let's take this liner off here. I should say this handle off of this liner. Those two there to the side, ready for later. Right. Next thing we need to do is our backspacer, and we are going to use some of this synthetic ivory to do it. Right. What we need to know is how thick our backspacer needs to be. Now, this is one of those areas in a liner lock folding knife that needs to actually be very precise. And the way we're going to figure it out is here is our blade. And let's get some bearings. These are 1.6mm caged ceramic bearings. And what we're going to do is we're going to put our bearings into their pockets. And take our caliper and measure our thickness between our bearings, the outside of our bearings. And our measuring that is 5.45. 44, 45, 46, 45. Yeah, 5.45. So we're going to allow a little bit of bedding in to happen, which means we want this to be ever so slightly smaller. So I'm going to shoot for this as being 5.35 mils thick. That's how thick we want our backspacer. So let's write that down before we forget. I'll write it on the liner, then I won't forget. 5.35 mils thick. That is how thick we want our backspacer to be. So I'm going to go now and cut a slice off of this. I'll oversize it initially, obviously, and then we will true it up to exactly 5.35. Now that we have our slice, we'll cut it roughly to shape. This will make it just a little bit easier to fine tune it to our final thickness that we need. Now what I'm doing is cutting some counter bores into the front side of the liner, of the lock liner. This is just to allow our screws to sink down a little bit deeper and fully engage on the threads once going through the backspacer, just because of the thickness of the backspacer. That's the stop pin cut and trimmed to final length. Now that we have our stop pin, now it's just a lot of putting the knife together and taking it apart, just checking our fit, making sure that the blade opens fully and closes fully. We want to make sure that when it's closed, the tip of the blade is fully contained within the liners, and then when it's open, that it's as far rotated as we want it to be. So this is very fiddly, lots of taking it apart, putting it back together, making small, tiny adjustments. But as soon as we got it to where we're happy, it's now time to drill for the detent bore. There is, we drilled our detent hole, but through the lock bar and into the blade so that they will line up perfectly. In my experience, and when I've made liner locks, the number one thing that can ruin the feel of a liner lock is a detent that is off. So there is our detent hole in the blade. We will enlarge that ever so slightly later, and there it is in the lock bar. But it is now time to bend the lock bar. So let's strip the knife. Now, when the knife is assembled, we want the ball of the detent ball, to be the only part of the scale of the lock bar that contacts the face. So the way you do that is we want to make sure that the bend that we put in, it's a gradual bend, but it's steepest here at the front, so that the detent ball is the first and only thing to touch the face of the blade. Hope that makes sense. So we're heating up the lock bar here in this thin section, and I'm going to give it just a small little tweak, not much. You can see we've already put a little bit of a bend in it. That's all I want there. Now we're going to heat up the back of the lock bar. And this is where we're going to put the main bend in from. Up there. Hold heat there for a little bit, hold it in position, and then hold it in position whilst it pulls off slowly. There it is. And now we can see we've got a gradual bend that's steepest at the tip of the lock bar. Let's go cut this off. You can see the bend in the lock bar there. Alright guys, I was hoping to get this out in 2 episodes. Unfortunately, going into the detail that we're looking at, it's not going to be viable. This episode is already half an hour long, so I hope you've enjoyed it so far. In the next one, we will definitely be finishing the knife. In fact, as I make this recording, I'm currently holding the knife right now. And trust me, it is well worth the wait. But thank you for watching so far. Look forward to seeing you again. Thanks.